Today we'll continue with the flexible binding in full leather by lacing on the boards and other jobs that need to be finished before we can cover the book. In the next video I'll prepare the leather by cutting it from the skin, dye it and pare it ready for covering. Last week we frayed out the cords, punched holes in the boards and cut some channels in the front of the boards to the first holes. We're all set to lace on the boards now. Before I do lace on the boards, I want to make a pair of hooked spacers that will maintain a small gap between the shoulder of the book block and the boards. The leather will pull the boards back into the shoulders when it dries. I think the book opens much better if a small space is maintained during the covering process. Not all binders do this, but many do. The method I've been shown is what I'm going to do today. But another method, which is also popular, is to temporarily tack a piece of cord on the spine edge of the board. I think this approach has a lot of merit, and I've been meaning to try it. In the past, I've used a folded piece of 10-point card, which is about 0.6 millimeters thick. Today, I'm going to use a single thickness of 20-point card that should be about the same thickness. I'll make them a bit smaller than the size of the book. The hooked spacer has an advantage in that it acts as another barrier for moisture from the leather, but it also holds the boards away from the book block, which I'm not sure is a good thing. This is why I'm thinking that the cord approach may have an advantage. I'll quickly use a smaller awl to make sure none of the holes have closed up in all the handling. Once the boards are laced on, I'm going to hammer the holes in the boards closed. So I want to get a heavy surface ready to hammer on. Then I'll saturate the cords in wheat paste, but not all the way to the shoulder. I don't want the cords stuck in the channels between the first hole and the board edge. I want the boards to be able to move up and down in case I want to maybe gild the edges, or maybe I haven't trimmed the edges yet. So I'll leave about 10 millimeters of the slips from the shoulders without paste. Once the slips are well saturated with paste, I'll cut them at an angle about 3 inches from the shoulders. The pointy ends will make them easier to lace into the boards. Lift the board up and lace the slips through the holes, pulling each of the slips tight. The boards will be laced on too tight at this point. As you lower the board, pull it away from the shoulder so that it closes easily, but there's no excess space in the joint. Once the slips are laced in, lay them flat pointing towards the fore-edge. Pick the book up and lower the book block away from the upper board. Placing the upper board over the heavy surface prepared earlier, hammer the second holes closed. Flip the book over and hammer the first holes closed. Be very careful not to hammer the cords over the edge of the surface under the board, which may cut the slips. Put the hooked spacer back in place and then do the other board. Now the excess slips past the second hole can be trimmed off. A very sharp and flexible knife is excellent for this. A paring knife works too, but maybe you don't want to blunt your paring knife doing this. I'll let the slips dry under pressure in the press. I'll replace the hooked spaces with metal pressing tins. If you don't have pressing tins, I hope to have these available for sale soon, or you can just use plastic sheet. Put the book between pressing boards and let the slips dry in the press. Even though we tried to not put paste on the slips in the channels on the edge of the boards, make sure the squares are even before pressing. Also, don't press the shoulders. After pressing, the slips should still be loose in the channels on the edge of the boards, which allows the boards to move up and down if required for trimming or edge decoration. We've just got a few things left to do to finish off the boards. The next step is back cornering, which is taking a nick off the spine corners of the boards. There are different styles of back cornering, and the version I'll use, I believe, is consistent with this binding. I haven't had a chance to refresh my memory on this subject, so I'll leave talking about back cornering styles for another day. I'll cut at least halfway through the board, but not much more than half, and about 3 millimeters along the head and tail of the board, and about twice this down the spine of the board. When forming the head cap, the leather will get pulled into the joint here, and removing this point will make it easier to form the head cap and avoid having a sharp point under the leather which could pierce through the leather or wear through later. I put a pressing tin under the corner of the board to protect the book while I'm doing the back corners. Now it's time to set the boards into their final location. I'll work some paste into the cords and into the channel on the boards. I'll put the hooked spacer in place and adjust the boards so that the squares are even. I'll then put the book between pressing tins or plastic sheets, and then pressing boards, and then place that back into the press for the paste to dry. It's finally time to cut the fore-edges of the boards. I've done 3 millimeter squares at the head and tail, and I'll make the fore-edge squares 4 millimeters. The final thing I'll do to the boards is take the very sharp edges off and take the sharp point off the corners. I'm not rounding or shaping the boards, just taking the sharp edges off. To protect the book block, especially the edges, we'll cap up the book. Because we'll need to open the book up for covering, we'll do it in halves. I'll just use some copy paper to wrap each half of the book. There'll be an area near the spine at the head and tail where the edges are exposed, and we can cover these up later if we think we're going to be messy, which we will be. The final job for today is making a template for the leather we're going to cut for covering the book. A piece of A3 paper is just going to be big enough. I'll start by drawing a 25mm margin on two edges, and then because the turn-ins are going to be 15mm, I'll draw another margin in 15mm from the 25mm margins. I'll position the book in the marked corner, fold the paper around the book, flip the book, and open the template to mark the other two edges of the book. I also mark where the shoulders are so I can mark in the outer joint. I then do the 15mm turn-in margins for the other two edges. Once the margins are marked, I'll cut the template apart at the outer margin. The inside piece of paper can be used to plan out pairing, and the outer frame can be used to choose the piece of leather to cut out of the skin. In the next video, we'll cut and dye the leather and pair it in preparation for covering. I'll talk more about the type of leather I'm using next week, but I've already been asked about it, so I'll quickly mention I'm using fair natural veg tanned goat from Steve Siegel leather, and I paid just over $40 for the skin, which I'll be able to cover 3 A5 sized books with in full leather bindings. It's a really good deal. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. As always, I really appreciate you hitting the big thumbs up button. If you're able and want to, you can support the making of more videos like this through Patreon or with a one-off contribution, and the details are in the description below. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button and select the notification bell. Until next time, cheerio.